So now when I use the term clarity, and in Vajrayana, the Tibetan term for it is Ösel, clarity. So I'm not speaking about it in the way that it's usually discussed in non-duality, which is often referred to a kind of cognitive clarity, right? A kind of clarity at the level of consciousness in regards to the nature of thoughts and the capacity to look directly into the experience. So often that is called clarity. But in this context, clarity means this sudden, unexpected, spontaneous appearance of the sense perception, completely peeled out of conceptualization, like peeled from conceptualization, which is the constant categorizing and labeling and like seeing things through thinking mind, through the ordinary mind. So how it appears is that the phenomena arises from this non-conceptual immediacy as nothing other. So thoughts and sensations, emotions, they arise as already liberated. They arise as liberation because it's so clear, this untainted, unblemished nature of the mind itself, and that the phenomena is nothing other. So everything appears kind of hyper vivid and fluid, very ephemeral, like in constant flux, but very timeless at the same time. So this experience of sense perception doesn't happen in time because time or causality is one of those conceptual filters that is demolished in the awakening process. So when this specific effect of awakening kicks in, reality appears in its original state, we could say. And it's always here, right? It's always here. So it's not about progressing on the path to some special realization. It's actually about a complete opposite. It's about regressing in the perceptual flow so thoroughly to the root of that spontaneous emergence that we're able to see that if we are not experiencing reality through this fundamental distinction of a subject and object, this like really subtle but profound dualistic split, then phenomena arises as natural perfection, or spontaneous presence. That's just another word for this expressive potentiality, this creative power of the ground that appears now dynamically as clarity, right? So all the colors are very effulgent, but they don't belong anymore to objects. They don't anymore belong to some objective world that is perceived. They are not perceived from distance. So the visual field collapses into a kind of flat, but at the same time, completely multidimensional, kaleidoscopic, kind of spontaneous emergence of light. So there is no seer. There is only this spontaneous manifestation of the visual field as an undivided, and it's incomprehensible for the mind. So the mind cannot understand this way of perceiving, because mind, like the ordinary mind, always perceives in terms of duality, that there is a seer and seeing and seen. But this is a fundamental collapse of that deeply rooted perceptual filter. And that applies to all the sense fields. So the sound is just this pure, radiant vibration, not here, not there. There's no hearer, no heard, no hearing. It's just this appearance, this lucid, self-illuminating appearance that is completely timeless and seamless, and at the same time utterly ungraspable. And the inner sense of the body, so the kinesthetic field, is equally completely insubstantial, but intensely present and sensitive. So there's no separation whatsoever. So when this energetic contraction called the self or self-grasping, that is very physical condition, when that releases, the whole of the body appears as this kind of field, this interpenetrative and interconnected fluid processing, basically, without any inherent existence or substance. So there's no distinction whatsoever here between the world and our most intimate sensation of our physicality, because it's just one spherical experiencing, which is in its essence experience-less, right? So this pure non-conceptuality is it's very much what makes this realization of the clarity possible. I mean, we can have certain glimpses into this way of perceiving. People can have certain glimpses through psychedelics, for example. So like LSD is famous for collapsing the kind of superficial layer of the ordinary mind and the narrative self. So the sense perception is suddenly like very vivid, and everything appears in a way that kind of imitates this natural condition, this clarity and transparency, of the phenomenal appearance. But because the psychedelic is an artificial chemical that kind of temporarily forces our system into this way of perceiving, it's not the same. It cannot induce the fundamental insight of emptiness, no mind, like recognition of the non-conceptuality, which is the recognition of the nature of the mind. So even if we have flashes into this way of perceiving, I would say that there is still a subtle filter there that is not perceived, but that is like one of the essential difference between when this is realized through genuine awakening process than as a temporary glimpse induced by the chemical substance in our brain. And so yeah, when it arises together with the non-conceptuality, this impact of clarity, luminosity, radiance, there is no reification, right? So without this tendency of the mind to constantly reify reality or reify identity into something, this luminosity is allowed to express itself, like without any attempt to make something out of it, like to call it the ultimate reality, or call it God, or call it our true essence, nature, or call it whatever people want to call it. Because this is like the trap of the inherent existence when we are tapping into this fluid and spontaneous natural expression of reality, that there is then the tendency to reify it into something, right? And then it instantly loses that otherworldly, like unblemished, spontaneous, kind of uninhibited, like wild, felt sense of it. Like we can never really say what it is, but the only way to remain in this freshness is to like fully release like this tendency to grasp it or try to possess it or own it or understand it, you know, through reification or through applying these kind of substantialistic views upon this reality. So that's another way to kind of make this into something actually existing, that we start to imagine that this is consciousness, or this is some sort of oneness reality, you know, that is experiencing itself. And it's just the habit of the mind, you know, to kind of use these views of inherent existence to interpret something which is utterly beyond views. So this is not a view. This is not a perspective on reality. This is not any kind of new paradigm of experiencing. That's why it's beyond the conditioned mind to comprehend what it is. But it will attempt, of course, if it has glimpses or openings. So I'm just pointing out here some of the ways the ordinary mind or the conditioned mind can kind of hijack these type of cracks, right, in reality. So I like to use the word clarity in the way they describe it in Vajrayana. So they use the term Ösel to refer to this particular experiential aspect of reality. And that's just my preference because I resonate deeply with that language. And sometimes just hearing a word like that is much more clarifying for me than any kind of complex intellectual or poetic or kind of cryptical sutras that aim to point out exactly the same. So just this simple word, a cell, for me, it resonates deeply. Like I think I heard it for the first time in Awakening to Reality blog. Someone was using that word, and that's a profound like remembrance. So in Vajrayana, it is said that this experiential impact, meaning Ösel, clarity, that is the true entrance into Vajrayana. You know, when our system reaches this point where, you know, this illusory container of the dualistic mind, it just spontaneously kind of collapses into this acausal, causeless ground, right? Something like that. And oftentimes the clarity comes together with bliss. So bliss is another impact that the awakening process has in our body-mind experience. So it's a kind of a sign that this unbinding process it's working, because when these deeply rooted mental constructs and beliefs and habits, they start to dissolve when the sense of separation, which is kind of like an energetic core at the center of the bundle of the narratives, right, and of the cognitive loops and behavioral loops. So when that starts to spontaneously self-liberate and self-release, which is the awakening process, like that manifests as bliss. So it's fundamentally nothing that different, than what we are used to call bliss in the conventional human sense. But at the same time, it is very different in its essence because like the conventional human world or paradigm, like bliss is always something that is experienced temporarily. It's always based on conditions, and that's why people are pursuing it, right? Because it's our in the dualistic way of perceiving reality, it's something limited, right? It's something that we need to cling to when it appears because we instinctively know that it's not going to last. So this type of bliss often manifests like just very intense aliveness or sensorial field of kind of like radical pleasure or ecstasy, or a kind of sudden surge of type of nectarian type of like fluidity that pervades our entire sense experience and our sense of self dissolves into it, or just very kind of high spiritual, would say inspiration. So all of this appears in the process of awakening, but at the same time, there's something fundamentally different about the kind of joy of reality waking up to itself and spontaneously unbinding these deeply rooted dualistic knots. So that kind of bliss is almost like threatening, actually, for the sense of identity. So the identity likes to have bliss as long as it's, it still doesn't threaten its fundamental reality, that it's the experiencer of a pleasurable experience. It's in charge, it's in control. It doesn't really kind of question anything fundamental about its own sense of reality. But this kind of, the bliss is not even a correct word for it. Energy would be better. Like this spontaneous responsiveness of the kind of joy of reality that is not an emotion. It's really just very uninhibited and innocent, like primordial innocent, pure delight that is released when this concealment of being a person, is being dropped. So bliss is here revealed to be the fundamental fabric of reality itself, but now it's so like free and so all-consuming, like fierce and wrathful and like radically autonomous, kind of like dancing, emptiness dancing, that this type of bliss is often extremely scary for people to encounter if there is attachment to a sense of being a separate self. So in that sense, it's not at all bliss in a human sense. So these two experiential impacts of awakening, like bliss and clarity, they obviously like interweave. And they are also one of the main pitfalls oftentimes, like in these phases of awakening where sudden dissolution happens, when deconstruction or de-reification takes place, and this self-liberating nature expresses itself, as intense, hyper-vivid, highly ecstatic, luminous field of total freedom. So it's just the habit of the mind to cling, to grasp around pleasurable experiences. So that's the habit of the dualistic mind that can still, and oftentimes can even intensify, like in the awakening process, as long as there is any sense of the identity left, because it will still perceive according to that fundamental paradigm of scarcity, that happiness or joy is something we need to hold on to. So it's just a habit, but it can cause like surprisingly uncomfortable state of stuckness during this process when these spontaneous openings appear, and sometimes they're called awakening honeymoons. And then when they apparently start to disappear, then there is often the tendency to try to hold on to the clarity and bliss. There's a sense that the awakening has been lost when those experiential aspects kind of dissolve in this fundamental, just empty nature, which in itself is without any characteristics. So this is kind of the creative, expressive aspect of the ground. So when it kind of dissolves into the purest potentiality, and we are not anymore experiencing that, then there's a tendency of the mind to interpret that awakening is that. And that's just the experiential expression of it, of course. And even though we see clearly with the insight that awakening is not that, it's nothing that the mind can ever grasp or comprehend. It's not an experience. And we see this with the genuine insight, we see this, and yet this tendency to grasp can still appear. So it's just something that many people go through, and there's really nothing about this experience. It's actually like a teaching in itself. Whenever we encounter just this direct sense of self-grasping, that when we are able to look into it directly with naked awareness, with the fundamental clarity of the insight, it actually deepens further that initial awakening. So it's never about getting rid of the grasping. It's always about seeing that actually this habit of the dualistic mind, it's just the unconditioned mind in disguise. So when you look into it directly, it evaporates into this pure spontaneity. And in Chen, they use this metaphor, like a snake uncoiling its own nuts. So that's how the grasping appears. It appears like an object when the dualistic mind functions, and then we attempt to fix it, we attempt to manipulate it, we attempt to work with it. But the most direct way to work with this tendency of grasping or fixating is not to interfere with it and to just look directly into it from this place of unconditioned mind. And then you see that it's actually nothing other, and it spontaneously liberates. So that's the path. But yeah, there's a lot that could be said, about this subject. And this is just what comes up to me spontaneously in this moment when I'm speaking about it. And yeah, Adyashanti said very well, uh, that fascination with states of consciousness or experiential aspects of awakening, I think we could call them states of consciousness. So fascination with states of consciousness leads to dependency and bondage. And I read that statement a long time ago, and I still think it's one of the most kind of precise and crystal clear pointers towards the pitfall of this expressive aspect of awakening. So fascination with bliss, fascination with clarity, like this hyper vivid sensorial, spontaneously manifesting, kind of like very otherworldly way of perceiving. Yeah, that's a pitfall. Like if there's any attachment or clinging that associates to it. And in my view, there can only be this type of attachment or clinging if we still haven't seen through the inherent existence. So the experience of the clarity and bliss, it appears like something actually existing. And then we start to cling to it. So when this absence of inherent existence, which is all about the pure non-conceptuality, right? The insight of emptiness. So when that is applied, like spontaneously and automatically, almost like repeatedly, alongside this awakening process, then this tendency to grasp will naturally kind of unwind at its root. Because in this reality where there is no separation, grasping makes no sense. When there is when that fundamental kind of split between experiencer and something that is experienced, when that is unseen, and then the clarity of that structural shift is being totally integrated, like in a very like somatic and physical and visceral manner. So it's not just the cognitive clear seeing, it's not just the insight at the level of the mind, it's an all-encompassing and all-consuming clarity in that sense. Now I'm using the clarity in this sense, right? In the sense of the fundamental insight. Yeah, in this pure non-duality, these experiential aspects of awakening, like clarity and bliss and no mind, non-conceptuality, they are just the kind of fabric of perception itself. And when that becomes increasingly clear, whenever the remnants of the karmic mind or the residues of the sense of separation appear and apparently kind of color the field of perception, it doesn't appear like a problem anymore. It doesn't appear like something has been lost and now the experience needs to be fixed or clarified or transformed or purified or corrected. So at this stage, and now I'm really speaking about these subtle aspects of deep realization. So in this stage, that is exactly the key that you see directly that samsara and nirvana arise from the same source, which is this empty clarity. So you cease interfering with the samsaric appearance when it arises, and you see that it's fundamentally nothing other than this nirvanic display of the enlightened wisdom mind. So you don't need to do anything about it. It actually becomes almost impossible anymore to separate them. Because when we cease seeing anything as a problem, like an appearance of a contraction appears, if there is nothing in the experience that registers it as a problem or something that we need to do about it, it doesn't appear as anything, right? It doesn't, even calling it contraction would require a certain type of interpretation. And if that's not occurring, just that experience of the energy appearing, it just liberates into the space by doing nothing, when this is very clear, when we are stabilized in the unconditioned mind. So yeah, so that's just one of the specifics of this path, like Dzogchen, because earlier on the path is actually crucial to be able to discern between like a habitual mind stream and the unconditioned reality. So to kind of separate samsara and nirvana very forcefully. So that's crucial when we are in this phase of a disentanglement from thoughts and clarifying like the nature of perception. That's crucial in familiarizing with the nature of the mind, with the recognition, with the fundamental insight. But when that becomes kind of like just a natural, effortless, spontaneous way of being, there comes this point where all techniques, so to speak, like any remedy that we would apply to our experience is going to be an obscuration. So that's when all of that is dropped. And it's so beautiful how this that kind of appears. And the path is really nothing but like this natural intelligence, this natural open intelligence of the ground appearing as the path, right? So yeah, it's I do feel like reverence now when I'm speaking about it, because it's so beyond the understanding what it is.